You don't know this, listener or viewer, whether you're listening on the podcast or viewing on YouTube. You don't know this, but we had to wait to initiate this podcast because Mark Clifton was snoring into the microphone.
I was.
Now, it may have been pretentious or it may have been real, but we can tell you this. He's just gotten a few hours sleep after flying in from Anchorage, Alaska, and getting in at 4 in the morning. So if he seems to be sluggish a bit, he has an excuse. If I do, I don't. So you can blame me for anything that's taken place. We have gone through a sermon series. We've gone through a podcast series called Why Failure in Ministry is Not Final. 2 weeks ago, from the airing of this podcast, we gave part one of this is why when you get fired or pushed out of a church. Part two of this is why when you fail in a church, when you're the problem. First one, church is problem. Second one is when you were a problem. And part three of this is how to recover from failure in a church. And it's going to happen, and you need to be prepared for that it's going to happen. In the meantime, know that this is Revitalize and Replant, sponsored by the North American Mission Board and churchreplanters.com. More than 10% of churches in North America are at risk of closing, and the North American Mission Board is committed to reversing this trend by decreasing the death rate of existing churches and simultaneously increasing the birth rate of new churches. Learn more about them, being a replanting pastor, or explore all the great resources about replanting and revitalization at churchreplanters.com. It's hard to say that you've enjoyed a series, Mark, that talks about tough issues of failure, firings, but I've enjoyed it in the fact that I think that so many of our church leaders and church members who are listening in will have benefited from it.
I agree. And I just, again, want you to know you're not alone in this. I know sometimes you feel like you're the only one going through it. This is really something just you and nobody else. You're part of a large group who experience this. And again, there's a continuum. I mean, we all have faults in our life. And some of us, we've created a lot of these issues. Others, it's primarily the church and its issue. And the previous podcast talk about that. But look, ministry's messy, and you deal with people, you're going to step into their messes. I mean, and someone said, I think it was Johnny Hunt, other of us said it, but I remember Johnny Hunt said, if you hang out with sheep, you're going to smell like sheep. I mean, it's going to get on you, and their problems are going to get on you. And I got somebody that posted on social media recently that it's a sad thing that the Walmart in town can be managed better than the local church. To which someone responded, well, maybe that's because Walmart isn't asked to walk people through the messiest parts of their life 24 hours a day, which is probably true. I mean, as a pastor, you have to deal with people who are in crisis and have problems, and sometimes they're just going to lash out at you, and you're going to get caught in that. So failure, we're all going to fail. And we all have those problems, and I just don't want you to feel alone. That's one of the main reasons for these 3 podcasts, so that you understand it's not the end of your ministry. We even talked, I know I'm just rehearsing this again, but we even talked about the extreme moral failure where perhaps you're disqualified from pastoral ministry or vocational ministry, but that doesn't mean you're disqualified from sharing the gospel and from sharing your story and from helping other people. I mean, God can still have a plan for you no matter what. Yes. If you'll be repentant and faithful to him. And absolutely. So anyway, let's move along. This is a good one here, and I'm excited for it.
Well, we ended on this note in episode 2. We'll begin on it in episode 3 of this part 3 of a 3-part series. Admitting and apologizing for the mistake is the critical first or early step. Own it, say it, and don't equivocate when you say it.
That's almost exactly what a guy named David Benham told me. I went to work at the Old Home Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention in 1986. I was 26 years old. And the first meeting, big conference we had, I was supposed to do something, and I didn't get it done right. And I was making all kinds of excuses. And David was a sweet guy. And he buzzed my phone and said, hey, come on down here and talk to me for a minute. So I went down to his office, and he said, close the door. And he said, I want to give you one word of advice that I learned a long time ago. He said, own your mistakes. Just say, I should have had that, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. And he said, and you know what? I have done that, and he's right every time. It's when guys try to come up with all kinds of excuses as to why it didn't happen. And my goodness, don't ever throw your secretary or your family or your staff member or anybody under the bus. Own it. Just say, I did it. I failed. I repent of that. I ask you to forgive me. I'm struggling with that in my life. It's my fault. I overcommitted. I overpromised. I didn't show up when I said I would. I have no excuse. I'm sorry. I didn't understand how important that Sunday school classroom was to that class before I asked him to move. I didn't know the history of that picture before I took it down. I'm sorry. I'll put it back. That's all tactical patience. It's just being a sweet and gentle shepherd and not being an idiot and trying to do things in a way that's just going to cause you more problems. So
One of my
absolutely.
many mistakes in ministry, First Church, First Merle, as I often call it, I was definitely, my condition was perpetually like you are right now, reaching for the caffeine, trying to stay awake after a long trip and going straight into podcasts with the not so exciting Rainer and trying to stay awake. And I was on that schedule, and I was working at a bank 30 hours a week. I was working at the church 40 hours a week. I was going to class 15 hours a week. I was studying 30 hours a week. You can add up all those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a sunrise service, and it was for the community churches. We all came together, and the rotation was my church. And I slept right through the alarm.
Oh, my word.
And finally, when I wake up and I realize what's going on, now I'm going to Easter service, and all of my church members are going to show up, and I didn't show up. And
You slept through Easter sunrise service.
I slept through the alarm and sunrise service. I did not get
Goodness.
there. And I usually don't sleep through alarm, so I must have been really, really tired. And I thought of all the excuses. I said, no, I'm going to follow my sword. And I got before him. I said, y'all know what? I'm burning the candle at both ends. That's not an excuse. That's a reality. And I slept through the alarm, and I want to offer my profound apologies. And Merle spoke up. He says, I was hoping you'd say that. And that was during the service. I was right before I preached. You know what? Recalling that still gives me shivers. And I'm not talking about what Merle said. I'm talking about that feeling that I had when I woke up and I realized I had missed it. And another pastor, of course, stepped right in and took over, and everybody was fine. But everybody knew it was Rainer's rotation. And by the way, I was the newest of the pastors, and they wanted to hear me.
Oh, man.
So it reminds me of those times that I thought I was tweeting, but I wasn't. Or I tweeted something that I shouldn't have and didn't mean to. And you said, no, pull it back.
Or those times that you tweet to somebody, but it's not the right person because there's like a chain on the thing or whatever.
Oh,
a few years ago, we were down here in Kansas City. There's a plaza lights that come on at Thanksgiving. It was really cold that year, really cold. And I was trying to meet my kids. They were down there. And so they texted me and said, how will we know where you are? And I texted them back and I said, well, I'm the only guy standing up here without my shirt on and waving my hat above my head and screaming and yelling, which wasn't true. I was just being funny, trying to be. But that text didn't go to my kids. It went to our Haitian pastor. So he texted me back and he said, Pastor Mark, are you okay?
Hey, it's funny. My first grandchild just got his first phone, and he texted me last night, and it wasn't meant for me. He said, "Oh no, Rad, that wasn't it. Wasn't that bad, but it was funny." Okay.
Anyway, where are we?
Apologizing for the mistake is the first early step. Sometimes when you have some kind of failure, and again, whatever the nature of the failure is will determine this, you may need to take a break. You may just be burned out. You may need to step aside for a little while.
And sometimes if it's a character issue and a character flaw, you definitely need to take a break and you definitely need to step aside. And sometimes you're just like you were working a job, you were going to school, you were trying to pastor a church. You came to the realization that you had no margin left. And when you're tired and exhausted like that, the opportunity to make mistakes increases significantly. And so sometimes you just got to realize, I just don't have the bandwidth right now to be the kind of pastor that I need to be. And it's a hard thing to be a pastor and then not be a pastor for a while. You
Mm-hmm.
do feel like a failure, but that can be one of the greatest seasons of your life in growth and maturity and spending time with the Lord and getting ready to go to the next pastor opportunity. So yes, sometimes you need to take a break after some kind of a failure. And if it was your fault and you did those things, that's a mature thing to do, to say, you know what, I'm not just going to run to the next relationship. I'm not just going to, sometimes you have a mistake, you make a mistake in a church and everybody gets mad at you and you kind of blew it. You think, okay, well, I'll just start fresh at a new church. And so you put your resume out there and you don't ever process those things you went through. And it's almost like a rebound relationship, and it's probably bound to fail too.
Also, find someone that you trust to talk to. Find trusted counselors. They don't have to be formal. They could be formal counselors. They could be people that do this for a living. I know that at Church Answers, we have a part of Church Answers called Church Answers Central, and I'll let Amy put the link there. Church Answers Central has almost a couple of thousand church leaders, and they feel so comfortable. They feel so safe there that they will write things and they will get all this kind of encouragement and support. Some of it will come from me, or some of it will come from our leadership, but most of it comes from other pastors and other church leaders. They have learned that ministry with ministry counselors, informal or formal, makes all the difference in the world.
And unfortunately, sometimes we don't want to acknowledge our faults and our failures to other pastors. We don't want to acknowledge it to people maybe that are in some kind of authority, like a district superintendent or a director of missions or a denominational person, because we think it might hinder our ability to find another church. We don't want to acknowledge to anybody that we have a weakness, because we're sort of in the open market out there to be a pastor and to have a church. And that's just a recipe for disaster, guys. I mean, you absolutely have to find some people that you can pour yourself into and say, look, man, hold me accountable. Help me be the better person that I can be. I need a coach. I need a mentor. I need someone to help sharpen me and shape me up and let me know when I'm going off the rails. Man, you got to have that. I mean, absolutely, you got to have that. So when you have some sort of failure, man, you need to take a break, but you got to find some people around you that will help keep you centered and help see the problems that maybe you're not seeing and help you find some ways to correct them. And do not have such pride in your heart that you're not going to open yourself up and be vulnerable to that kind of thing, because that's just a second fault you'll have. So don't keep digging the hole deeper by not sharing that with anybody.
You and I are baby boomers, and I think our generation and the one before us, the builders, you're a boomer, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I came near the end, but I am.
No, you
Or
were
the beginning. I don't know. 1960. When were you? We've talked about this before.
55.
When does the boomers stop? 64? 63?
46 to 64.
46 to 64. All right. Well,
So-
my wife's not a boomer. So she's not a Gen X. She's not the builder either.
She's Gen X, Mark.
Yeah, she's Gen X. Okay, I got that.
I know what you're trying to say, and I'll help you on that.
Sorry.
So my generation, your generation, and even the generation before us had a lot of hesitation to admit that we've made a mistake. I've seen that in boomer pastors, including me, that for whatever reason we were hesitant to talk about our weaknesses. I see millennials and Gen Z. I see them more willing to say, "Okay, I haven't got it all together, and I'm willing to say that." That over you don't want to be too self-confessional from the pulpit or any other place, but that overall is a healthy trend.
Well, I think definitely the Gen Xers and the younger pastors are much more inclined to hang out together and to share with each other and to be in collaboration with each other. That's why the networks, all the church planting networks, the other networks, we didn't have those in the 1970s. We really didn't. We were all on our own.
Answers in the 1970s.
No, and so we really didn't have the networks. You had your denomination, but again, you weren't necessarily vulnerable to the denominational folks and either pastors in your region, because you didn't want to show any weaknesses. And, my father was a pastor for 50 years and a very successful one. But I remember my mom used to say, your dad just doesn't have any close friends. And he didn't. He was of the mindset that you shouldn't have really close friends in the church. You can't play favorites. And then he had pastors who were acquaintances with him, but my dad didn't have any really close pastor friends at all. And I could tell, and later in life, it did weigh on him not to have those close relationships. And I see the benefit of those. And part of that was he was the greatest generation. He was the
Yeah.
generation before us. And there was that sense of you don't acknowledge your problems, you don't cry with anybody, you just have a stiff upper lip, and you certainly wouldn't complain to another pastor about your problems. And that was the way they functioned. But hopefully we've learned from that, realized that's not a healthy way to go. And if you've had a failure, man, that's a great opportunity to just find some people to come around you and help walk you through that. I've learned more in my failures than I ever learned in my successes.
Well, that's good because they're
And I've
voluminous.
grown more. I've grown far more in my failures than I ever have in my successes. And God showed me more of myself. And as the Apostle Paul said, in my weakness, he's made strong. It's in my failures that I need to rely more on him. And I find myself doing that. So if failure causes you to be drawn to Christ and lean on him more, then it can really be a blessing. But if you use that failure not to be drawn to Christ, but to try to cover it up and blame other people and throw people under the bus, it'll have just the opposite effect.
We are going through the series, Why Failure in Ministry is Not Final. If you didn't listen to part 1, it aired on December 2nd. Part 1 is when you get fired or pushed out of a church. If you did not listen to part 2 of the series, it aired on December 9th. And it is when you fail in a church as opposed to the church pushing you out. And now we are in part 3, and this originally airs on December the 16th, How to Recover from Failure in a Church. And here is point 4. Though you don't want to minimize your failure, you ultimately need to move forward positively in ministry. And that's what I've had to learn to do with failure, disappointment, hurt, Mark. The windshield is a lot better to look through than the rear view mirror. And it's the way that we have to do ministry because that's the right theology as well.
The adversary wants you to focus on your past and focus on your failures. And look, that's what legalism does for us. Some of us are really caught up in legalism anyway, and by the way we've been brought up and sort of the environment we've been in. And legalism, if we succeed and we obey all the rules and we sort of have some degree of success, it tends to lead to pride, and that's a sinful thing. But the other part of legalism is if we feel like we don't live up to it, then we feel sort of hopeless, like, why even keep trying? I'm just not worth anything. And I talk to pastors, and you do too, who failed, and now they feel like, I'm not talking moral failure. I'm talking they misjudged somebody. They didn't fulfill a commitment they made. They made some missteps with a committee somewhere. They didn't handle things right with the deacons. Maybe they responded in a spiteful way to somebody who was spiteful to them, and they think, and now they're ready just to quit entirely.
Right.
And God can't use me. Sure, he can. God's pretty good at using broken vessels. He's pretty good at using people who are willing to acknowledge, hey, I'm all messed up and I can't do this in my own flesh. That may be exactly where God wants to put you in order for him to use you. So if he has to break you in order to mold you, then enjoy the breaking and let him do that.
Well, we will put a bow on this entire series on how to recover from failure in a church. The series is Why Failure in Ministry is Not Final. And this episode, How to Recover from Failure in a Church, with this profound, obvious truth, but it needs to be repeated again and again because so many of us need to be reminded of this. Never forget that Christ has forgiven you. So
Right.
No matter who's holding a grudge against you, no matter who may see ill of you, no matter how much you feel like you have messed up, remember Christ has forgiven you. And that is the mission to move on. And we preach it and we teach it. And we talk about the Apostle Paul, who was the one who gave permission for Christians to be martyred. And yet he moved on. He moved on forward. He admitted who he was in the past, but he said, I press on. I press on toward the goal. And that is what we have been called to do. We have been forgiven, and we are going to mess up in ministry, but we recover because Christ is there to wipe it clean and let us move forward.
I had someone say one time, and this has been so profound in my life, sometimes we say wipe it clean. And I understand. I used to say that a lot too. It's like when Christ saves us and redeems us and takes the sin as far as east and the west, it's like he wipes the slate clean. But I heard a pastor one time say, no, it's not like that. It's like he takes that slate and completely obliterates it and brings in a brand new one that's never been written on.
Mm.
That's how clean we are. And sometimes I just have to remind myself that, yes, in my flesh, I'm a mess, but God doesn't see that. He sees the perfection of his son when he looks at me. And it's a slate that's never even been written on. That is who God sees when he sees me. And I have to have that mindset. So good word. Thank
The
you.
right way to end a podcast, a YouTube cast, the right way to end a series. Once again, we've taken three podcasts over 3 weeks on why failure in ministry is not final. We looked at it from the perspective of being pushed out by the church in part one. Part two is when you mess up. And part three, though, which I think is the most encouraging of all of them, I hope they're all been encouraging, how to recover from failure in church. And we started off by saying you're not alone. We ended it up by reminding that Christ forgives you. And what
Amen.
a way to begin and an end. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed these 3 podcasts that we have had together. Get some sleep, my friend, and we'll be at it very soon. We'll be at it in 2022 before we blink an eye, and we'll be doing those. And
Well, I'll come down and spend Christmas Eve with you again, like we do every year. It's sort of a tradition you and I have where we sit around the fire and sing Christmas carols and just enjoy
my
ourselves.
grandkids love you playing Santa Claus.
Hey, I am available. Okay, so you can
They love it.
email me. I have a price. I'm not cheap, but I am available.
We'll pay the price because let's see, we'll have 11 grandchildren, 8 adults. We'll have 19 of us.
There you
19
go.
seniors in the
All
house.
right.
We'll be ready to
All
see
right.
you. Thank
All
you
right.
again for listening to Revitalize and Replant. Remember, if you're listening to this on a podcast, give us a rating and review wherever you listen, whatever your favorite podcasting app is. Also, remember, if you are watching this and looking at all the mannerisms of Rayner and Clifton and Ezel on other ones, if you are watching this on YouTube, subscribe, review, comment. Just let us know that you're there. We'd love to hear from you in a multiplicity of ways. Always thank you, and we always thank Revitalize and Replant and churchreplanters.com and the North American Mission Board for being our sponsor. We're grateful to them. Their mission is to revitalize, replant, and plant, but their mission is also to come alongside you who are leading the church. And all of us together are seeking to make churches healthier, and that is the path we'll continue to make. Have a great Christmas if I don't talk to you before then. See you later.